Welcome to Ripstop on the Record, a podcast where fabric enthusiasts and DIY gurus discuss all things make your own gear, with the occasional poor attempt at comedy to keep it interesting. I'm Kyle Baker, the owner and founder of Ripstop by the Roll, and we're excited to have you listening.
Hey everyone, welcome to Ripstop on the Record. I'm Jameson.
I'm Carter.
And I'm not Carter, I'm Isaac.
Very good. So today we will be talking about how to make patterns at home. So say you want to bridge the gap from buying kits, or some kits rather, to making some of your own things. This is hopefully what we're going to teach you today, is to help you start to make things that come to your mind on your own, but not stuff that other people have made yet. What would you add to that, Carter?
Yeah, I would also say, we'll go through different ways. There are certainly some in-depth, expert ways of making patterns using, software, all the way down to something as rudimentary as taking something that you already have that you want to improve and maybe reverse engineering it a little bit to make it more customized for you. So I'm excited to have Isaac drop some knowledge because I don't know much about this.
We'll get into all of that in just a minute.
I don't either.
But as always, a few updates. So new products coming up. The first one is coming on July 19th. So 2 weeks from today, which I guess is 1 week from when this is going to be released, or 2 weeks. 1 week from, it's coming up soon. You'll know what I mean in the future. July 19th is Taslan. Without getting too gnarly, give us a little bit of a hint on what the Taslan's like.
This is nylon Taslan, commonly referred to as supplex as well. So this is a plain weave fabric that you might see in high-end Patagonia baggies, shorts, and other windbreakers and things like that. We've come up with our own custom version of that involves some lighter weight fabric as well as very, very soft and some cool colors to boot, as they say in the streets.
Well, to shorts.
To shorts.
If you want to make some other shorts, then we're releasing a fabric 2 weeks from when you're listening this, also known as August 9th, which will be a special airwave fabric. You should see teasers on this now. So it's going to be, let's say it's not going to be a static fabric. Isaac, what do you have to tell us about this one?
So it's going to be a dynamic fabric. Is that what you're hinting at?
Yeah.
So it's going to be a kind of more technical fabric. It's going to have a little bit of a four-way stretchy boy action going on with a little bit of a ripstop grid to increase the ripstop capabilities.
Like aesthetics.
Yeah, like aesthetics. And it's going to be great for shorts and other outdoor pants. A little more of a high-tech, higher quality apparel fabric.
Still in the apparel realm, just like the Taslan.
And one more thing. The thing that I'm most excited about for airwave stretch is what we're calling it, because it uses the same air textured yarn magic that we've come out with our hammock specific fabric previously, is the price. So be on a lookout for an awesome stretch woven, higher quality or as high quality as anything else you can find out there, but at a price that makes it a lot easier for you to make your own technical outdoor wears or indoor wears and underwears, whatever you'd like.
And outerwears.
Speaking of outerwear, these hats are still on sale. Go check them out. These are the ones from Trail Days, the MYOG logo hat. It's not a kit. We've got a lot of questions about people wondering if this hat is a kit or not. It's pre-made. You just get to buy it and then wear it. It's from Boco Gear, Technical Trucker. Go check it out. Sweet Sage Topo patterns. We also have a few roll top dry bags left over, some of the finished ones, and some of the kits if you're interested in that really awesome mural that Justin made. So that's it for new products. Let's get into the episode. Okay, let's get to the bulk of the episode today, which is how to make your pattern at home. So right off the bat, like I said earlier, we want this to be a transition from maybe you have experience building kits and pre-done patterns, but you don't have experience knowing how to make a pattern or take an idea that you have in your head and translate that into dimensions and components and an idea of how you would then construct that in real life. And that's what we want to do here today, is help you do that. To expound on that, why would you want to know how to make your own pattern at home?
So I think you're touching on a lot of it, but one of the the basis for making your own gear is like choosing your own journey, right? So the reason we exist is to help people make their own stuff. Now, we've tried to create this journey where you can start out with a kit that we've already done all the quote unquote hard work for you. And those are awesome. And I think people will continue to use those.
You should.
But, that's still not a custom piece, right? You're still, using Isaac and mine and yours, like thoughts and designs. And you're making that and it's creative, but it's not the same thing as saying like, hey, my significant other needs a coin purse. Like, how do I make that? So the first step in making these patterns at home or making a pattern wherever you are is making something that doesn't exist, right? There's not a pre-made pattern for this that gives you step-by-step instructions. It's not laser cut. So you want to do this if you want to branch out and fully maximize what DIY is all about.
For me, a lot of making patterns at home is about getting more precise. There's kind of a difference between making your own stuff that's not a kit and then making patterns. For some people, that space might not exist as much, where you might only make things beyond kits if it's done in a pattern form, or if you can create that. I don't mean pre-made patterns, I mean for yourself. So for me, I've kind of honed this for me a lot more in the last year of like making my own patterns versus just like kind of run through the sewing machine and see what happens. So for me, it's about getting more precise and understanding like this is a 25-liter bag. I know that because I've made it to these specific dimensions versus just like guessing on the dimensions, guessing on the application, being like, how did I get a 35-liter bag?
Yeah, we were kind of talking about this yesterday. You were asking me about like specific sizes of separating zippers and how you would know what size separating zipper you would need for a specific project. I was like, well, Jameson, that's where your pattern comes into play, because when you know like how long that seam is going to be, that's when you know what size zipper you need to get.
Yeah. All right. So we know why you might want to make your own pattern. And let's talk about the tools that you're going to need to accomplish that. These aren't always really expensive ones. These are something you might even have at home, but they also might cost something. So let's get into that. Isaac, I think you might be the most qualified person, having worked with a lot of these higher end tools. What are people going to need?
So, I mean, the first thing that you're definitely going to need is something to write on or to trace on or draw on, whatever. In college, for me, that looked like these giant rolls of like grid paper that we literally had like on the same rolls as like the fabric. We'd just go over there and like take some off. But for anyone at home, that could look like some wrapping paper that you get from the store that has like a grid pattern on the back of it, something that can give you like a defined grid pattern so that you know what your drawings are, what your measurements represent, things like that. After that, you're going to need some drawing tools, some measuring tools. And yeah, I mean, those are the main things. Like with drawing tools, you really want to make sure that you have like a fine point mechanical pencil or pen or something. I like to use mechanical pencils just because it's easier to erase. And then as far as measuring devices, a flexible ruler is really handy to have because you can like measure curves, and then once you take that ruler away from the curve, it stays in that shape so that you can translate that shape onto your paper. And then there are some like specific apparel rulers and things like that that if you're making apparel are very helpful to have. Yeah.
So that's the less expensive realm, which is awesome for people at home. What about the tools for the people that are maybe more serious about getting into this?
Well, I mean, you can look into things like computer software or computer-aided design. A lot of companies are using 3D design now to make their patterns and to make their final products. There's a few that are available to the public. Clo 3D is one of the most widely used and I think recognized 3D pattern drafting softwares. There's a lot of good resources out there for using that software. But then aside from that, Adobe Illustrator is a great tool to use because you can, let's say you have like a pattern that you bought from the store, you can take pictures of it or upload that to Illustrator and then convert that into a digital pattern, and then you can use that digital pattern to make edits or change it however you want. And then there's other free online CAD programs. I know Carter uses a bunch of them, right? Or
Yeah.
has used.
Yeah, I've used quite a few of those, and we'll get more in depth when we talk about like ways to create a pattern. But another thing, there are also like not higher end, but like more involved tools that you could use. Like mannequins are one that you probably aren't going to use that if you're making just a one-off jacket for yourself because you have yourself to model after. But if you're really getting into it, mannequins are something that you could use. You could hire live people, I guess, to come to your house and try on the whatever you're making.
Fit model.
Yeah, I don't know if they do that, but that'd be sick. I'm sure someone's out there doing that. So,
or you can find yourself a 3D modeling booth and go in there, and it'll take all of your body measurements by scanning you in 3 dimensions.
And it'll also put you in NBA 2K24.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody's done that.
To get back to Clo 3D, the one that Isaac was mentioning, it does obviously cost some money. It's $50 a month or $450 a year if you're an individual. So it certainly is an investment, which may or may not be worth it to you. But if you're making patterns once a week, then it could save you a lot of time to do it that way. So this is something I didn't know before we did this outline review a couple weeks ago. But Isaac, you were talking about how within software programs there are like presets and stuff that help you kind of get further down the line quicker. Could you talk about why someone might want to spend $50 a year for Clo versus trying to create a t-shirt pattern on their own at home?
So a lot of those preset things, and I don't know what exactly Clo includes in that, $50 a month prescription or subscription. There could be like additional things that you have to pay for, but one of the coolest things about using CAD programs is you can basically download like a basic sloper pattern, right? If you want to make a jacket or pants or whatever, you can download basic sloper patterns, and then you can edit those sloper patterns to make them into what you want, right? So you don't have to start from ground zero all the time using like your body measurements to make your patterns. You can start with another pattern, edit it, and go from there. And then there's other cool tools like if you're going to be using any kind of a nested sizing chart, they'll do that for you. Like you can put in what measurements you want between each of your sizes, and then those nested patterns will be basically like auto generated based off of those measurements.
And to expound on that, sloper is basically just like the most rudimentary outline of the piece, the pattern piece. So I kind of think of it like if someone was wearing a jacket and then you took your glasses off, that's what you'd see. But that's what Isaac's talking about. Is it's just like the basic building block of that gives you full customizable control over, let's say, a vest pattern, but it's like it gives you the opportunity to shape that or size that or add zippers or buttons or collars or like whatever you want to do. So that's really helpful versus, which some people will opt to do this, or it's not within their means to have these programs, and you don't need them. But otherwise, you'd be either buying a sloper or downloading one from the internet, or however people find those things. I don't know.
So we don't personally not personally here at Ripstop, we don't use Clo 3D at all. So like this isn't any sort of like advertisement for them. We don't get anything out of that. We don't even use it. But just to give people an idea, what do we use when we are creating, let's say the pack and cube pattern, for example? We cut that on our contract cutting equipment down at that part of the building. Like we had to send them a DXF file. So we had to build that some way digitally. What did we do to create that?
So first off, this can be an ad for Clo 3D. The reason we don't use Clo 3D is because for businesses, it's very expensive.
A lot more than $50 a month.
It might be worth it to us now that we're doing some more apparel stuff, because that's really where you get your money's worth. But anyways, what I mostly use is a combination of Illustrator and the pro version of Google SketchUp, because we haven't done much apparel. I don't know. I know that you can do more advanced 3D modeling with those programs. I don't know how that works with pattern grading, but for the Pack and Cube kit, I basically used all Google SketchUp to create that. Exported them as DXFs. It took a while to get some of the stuff right. But yeah, that's what I used. That's what I've used for every single kit from the I think the first kit I ever designed was the zipper pouch kit / the DZP in 2017. So that's pretty much what I've used for everything.
Just because I don't want to get too lost in the software and like expensive tool conversation, in general, you probably have what you need at home to make a pattern. Like you'll have some version of paper, wide format or otherwise, a yardstick and a ruler, a marker, a pencil, something like that. I personally just use I have a notebook that I like bring in my backpack where I keep most of my like pattern drawings now that I'm trying to actually build it out, and I'll draw out like fairly detailed sketches of the panels of a pack or a bag that I'm making, dimensions, liter capacity, stuff like that. But yeah, you probably have what it takes. You don't have to spend any money to get going, really.
Honestly, if you don't have like wide format paper, like wrapping paper, you can just take some printer paper and some scotch tape and tape them together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're making like a bag or something that doesn't require a lot more like wide space, not apparel specific, like I've seen you guys multiple times use like cardboard, just thin cardboard, break down a box and reuse that.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the ways to create a pattern. When we say that there are a bunch of ways to create a pattern, we don't mean to like export a DXF of this thing necessarily. It's we say ways to create a pattern. It's ways that at home you can have a really good sense of the you can have good amount of clarity on what it is you want to make, and then recreate that or adjust it if you need to through a couple different methods. So first, Isaac, tell us about deconstruction.
So deconstruction is, I mean, exactly what it sounds like. You take something that you already have and you tear it apart, and then you tear it apart in a you tear it apart in a specific way, in an orderly way, so that you get, the pattern pieces from that object, right? So let's say you're tearing apart a backpack. You want to go through each of the seams, seam rip it, and that way you have like panels where you can see, how it was put together and how those panels were sewn together to create that final product. So deconstruction is basically taking an item you like or that you want to recreate or change in some way, tearing it apart so that you have the pattern pieces, and then translating that onto paper or whatever.
Yeah, and I think as we go through these, you'll basically, not that it's necessarily in order, but the different ways that we have to make patterns are kind of organized from easiest to most involved. And I think that this is definitely the way that I got involved into making more complex stuff. Is I saw this really cool, like one of the first things I did is I got some t-shirts from Goodwill, and I just took them apart at the seams and then like customized different sleeves and stuff like that. And that's how I learned about like how sleeve patterns work, because I definitely didn't have the money or the space in my like college apartment to start from scratch, nor did I even know how to do any of that. But I was like, okay, if I can buy something that's already basically been recycled by someone, this is a good opportunity for me to seam rip this or cut it close to the seams and put it back together and figure out how it works. So definitely one of the best ways that you can start to understand how things go together.
Number 2 is tracing. In some ways, this is like the second part of the deconstruction, but what does a tracing method look like?
So this is something that Jameson does a lot, which this is really cool too. So this would be like something that you can't necessarily, we're getting into now where it doesn't exist, like we talked about in the intro. Like this thing doesn't exist at all and you want to make it. So like, how do you do that, right? So let's use the example of a cover for your cell phone. Okay, you need to make a cell phone cover. I tried to use something random, right? So you're not going to take your cell phone apart and measure all the pieces, right? That wouldn't be good. You can't deconstruct it because there isn't a cover for it in front of you. So what you want to do is take that same paper that Isaac was talking about in your mechanical pencil and trace those dimensions out. So now you have something that you can trace and then build in seam allowance and other stuff, but you're going to have to decide like the seam allowance and the dimensions, but you have a head start because you didn't have to design the phone. It's already there for you. So that's basically what tracing is.
I did this last week with my brother-in-law. Loves swinging sharp things around, I guess, but he's got a bunch of like hatchets and axes and throwing knives and whatnot. And he always just keeps the axes in the back of his car. Like this seems kind of like a bad idea, Wes. We should probably build something for that. So like I traced the axe head out in the stock and whatnot and made a cover for it. But that's, I don't know, just a direct example of that.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't get pulled over.
Yeah. We talked about it the other day, actually. Like, Wes, if you get pulled over, you have like 20 beers. I just gave him like whatever Coors Light I had left over because he isn't working right now, so it helps him out, So I gave him those beers, and he had 10 axes in the back seat, and like, you're fine. Like, it's totally fine to have these. And also, it'd be a weird conversation with the police officer to be like, yes, I have many weapons. None of them are really a threat to you, but there's many in the back of the car.
He's still driving a minivan too, isn't he?
Yeah. His
That thing is
childhood
sick.
minivan. Okay, so after tracing, hand drafting. Isaac, tell us about this.
So hand drafting is kind of the more traditional, like, apparel pattern drafting, right? So when you're hand drafting a pattern, you typically have your body measurements, and you're using like the measuring tools that we talked about earlier to measure like curves from a certain point, and then that's going to determine where your arm side point is, and like it's basically taking dimensions or body measurements and translating that to a sloper, which is we talked about earlier. This is definitely more of an advanced style of pattern drafting, and if you are interested in doing like any kind of formal pattern drafting for apparel or things like that, I would definitely recommend looking into like getting some books or taking a class. We'll talk a little more about resources later, but there's just a lot of minute details that go along with hand drafting that can throw your pattern way off if you're not careful.
I feel like I've experienced that with really simple projects. I can imagine like just throwing a pair of shorts together and seeing how that would come together. All right, last example is digital pattern building. Is there anything that you would add to digital pattern building that we didn't talk about earlier? I think it's pretty obvious now.
Yeah, I would just say that it's basically hand drafting, but your hands are doing different stuff, right? They're on the keyboard and the mouse, and they're not on the paper in the house, So digital pattern, I think that it's probably pretty cool or a good idea to still take a class from like Udemy, or you can just Google free pattern making class and watch some videos,
stuff on YouTube and whatnot. Yeah,
I think it's a good idea. Like, you still have to be able to understand those things and know how to probably draft something by hand if you're going to be able to maximize the capabilities of CAD. CAD is more like, okay, you know how to do the basics. We're going to cut the time in, more than half for making different sizes, or you don't have to now like make the sloper, like whatever that is. But I don't think it's probably the best idea to just pay a bunch of money for that. And then, of course, you can, and I'm sure lots of people can do it. If it were me, I would want to get some background knowledge first, and then you can truly use that. If you just got tons of money, just buy it. I mean, if
it's the software is assuming that you already know what to input in the software. Like, you can't just be like, make it roughly this big. Like, sometimes when I'm drawing stuff on paper, I'm kind of like just holding it to the ruler. I'm like, I'm going to half an inch larger. Like, some of those things are kind of nice to know before you get to the software side. That's kind of what you're saying, right?
Sometimes. I mean, there are plenty. Isaac will talk about some of the different videos and stuff that you can watch in Clo3D. I'm sure they also have their own different walkthroughs and stuff as you're learning how to use it. But I still think it's a good idea to, like, for instance, I think that Isaac would have a much easier time using Clo3D to make clothing patterns than I would. He has a lot more experience in hand drafting and understands this stuff on a higher technical level than I do. I'm sure I could figure it out, but I won't be able to use Clo3D to its max potential for probably like a year.
Yeah. So there are quite a few places where people get there's a lot of road bumps in creating your own patterns at home, and initially this is going to be more on the non-software side of things for the first couple of these. But let's talk about some of these places that it's really important to pay close attention to detail with what you're doing. Can you talk about a few of those, Isaac?
Yeah. So a lot of these concepts are going to be similar to, like if you're doing any kind of carpentry or I don't know, like building of any kind, like you just need to be very cognizant of like how consistent you are with certain parts of that making, if that makes sense. So let's say for part of your pattern, you use like a fine tip mechanical pencil and then you set it down somewhere and lose it. So then you go to like a chisel tip Sharpie, right? Those two lines are going to have vastly different widths. And when it comes to cutting out that pattern, or when it comes to like adding in your seam allowance, there's going to be much more variation in that chisel tip line as there is in the mechanical pencil line.
I see. Yeah, because like line width for me, something I've had to get much better at is knowing which side I want to cut on. For a while, I'd always cut. So like we use Sharpie a ton around here. I don't know, it's what we always have around, but I would always cut on the outside of the Sharpie. And then obviously I had some projects that I ended up seeing the Sharpie on the finished product, and I got kind of annoyed. I'm like, oh, I could solve this by not including the Sharpie in the product. So something even like line width, like making sure you're always, like what you said, the pencil to the Sharpie, but also like what side of the line you're cutting on.
Yeah.
Just keep that consistent in your pattern as well.
Yeah. Which, I mean, comes into play for seam allowance. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, like typically when you're adding your seam allowance, you have like I like to use a clear ruler, right? And I use the lines on the ruler, then I go around the pattern piece and I mark out a quarter of an inch from my line.
Mm-hmm.
If you're using a Sharpie, which is a lot thicker than the mechanical pencil, and you measure from the outside of that line versus the inside of that line, that could be, a 16th of an inch or an eighth of an inch more in your seam allowance in certain places than what you intended to add.
Yeah. A lot of these things save time too. Like I can't tell you how much time I've wasted having to understand my seam allowance better, or like trims things off before I bind the inside of my project. And if you do a little bit of work ahead of time, it will save you time later on when you're already frustrated your project's not working out. Not at all speaking from experience.
Right. And it also kind of ties into, I can't remember which, a recent episode where we talked about prototyping and stuff. Like that becomes extremely valuable because you're trying to get this product to like its final version. And when you don't do those things, or you're not equipped to do them yet, it just makes that process so much harder. And then you might convince yourself not to do it. Right. Like what Isaac's talking about, right? Let's say you have a hood that you need to attach, but you've done what he's talking about, and now you have an eighth of an inch on each side of seam allowance, and now that hood doesn't fit. So that entire design, you're gonna have to, if you've already cut it out, you've already spent the time to cut it out, you've already sewn it together, and now they don't fit. So what are you gonna do? You have to restart. So like that's one of the most important things is making sure that precision's there, or learning how to do that. It might take some time for you to practice making sure you're being precise, but it's definitely, you're right, it can be a real time saver, and it's just good practice for most things, right? Like driving, try to be precise. Maybe don't, like, if you're parallel parking, try not to hit the cars. It's really good.
I hear that's how they do it in California.
Another place where a lot of people that are starting to make patterns get caught up is fabric orientation, especially with something more notable like an X-Pack or something with a really clear grid pattern or something. But it also changes it can change the product quite a bit depending on which way you use your fabric. What would you say to fabric orientation, Carter?
It's really important. This is in almost all patterns that you would buy and use that are apparel specific. Like they will tell you which way to orient the fabric, because fabric has stretch on the bias, and then some fabrics have like different stretch in the warp and weft, or in the horizontal and vertical. A great example of this would be our beanie kit, right? We actually had that mistake happen where I designed it for the fabric to go a certain way, because it has more stretch in one direction. And so everything fits together. It goes over your head nicely, but fits snugly. And in the other way, there's not as much stretch, so it'll be too small. And what happened was one of our laser people, I didn't like relay that to them. I just assumed that they would put it in there in that way. But of course, they're trying to save as much fabric and time as possible. So they rotated it. And then that's again why you prototype, because they cut one out for me, which is something we always do. And I made it, and I was like, why does this look like I'm wearing a child's shoe on my head? And like doesn't fit at all. So definitely things like fleece or stretch wovens or other materials, it's even more important For X-Pac, it's just aesthetic, right? Like you might want the grid to go the whole way. That's not going to affect your product at all. It's not going to make it like fail.
Sure.
But for other materials, if you spent all this time to create a pattern for a jacket and then you have the pattern pieces you've cut them all out to save material all on the diagonal, and then you go to put it on and one sleeve looks like a grandma arm and the other sleeve looks like a fawn leg. Like,
Yeah,
that's not good.
One other thing that I would really recommend people look into is have a really good understanding of what components you want to use. That will dramatically affect what panels you put where and how you attach them and whatnot. Write all that stuff out earlier. We released a good PDF that you can have. Well, we can link it in the show notes here. That it's a project sheet. So when you're thinking of building a project, you can list out the materials that you want to use, the components you want to use, how many of them, notes about that thing. Really be intentional about listing out what it is you want to do. Because if you plan to use a certain type of buckle, there may be a certain type of webbing you have to use, and that can only attach in a certain way, or a patch that you want to use. Just know what it is you're going to attach there first. Just be really clear about components. Anything else that kind of these frequent stumbling blocks that you see with pattern building?
Yeah, I would just say make sure you label each of your pattern pieces very clearly. Something that I was taught and got into a habit of was just for every pattern piece is you put the same information on each one, right? So you put like, when I was doing this, it was like the style of clothing, what collection it was for, who the designer is, like what pattern piece it is, and then what fabric it's being cut out of and how many to cut of that pattern piece, right? So that way, like if you ever go back to this pattern and reuse it, you know exactly what it's for, when you designed it, who you designed it for, what fabric you need to be cutting it out of.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And that way it just helps you to keep all of those pattern pieces organized. Because like if you're putting all this work into making pattern pieces and then they're all just like thrown in a drawer somewhere and you don't know which one goes to which, like what's the point?
What are you talking about?
Yeah, and that even applies.
That was not targeted at all. I was just saying.
that even applies to digital pattern making as well. I've done this. I've worked on and designed a lot of pre-cut kits in my own projects in different computer programs over the years. And especially when I was first starting out and learning how to use 2D design and stuff, I just labeled stuff like Carter's project and the date. So like now there might be a kit that Isaac and I want to bring to market, and I'm like, oh, dude, this is awesome. I already developed like 3 of these like 5 years ago. We can use that as our sloper, if you will. Let's go back and look at it. And then I look in all my files, and it's just like 7-16-8 2018 Carter hat. I'm like, oh, I don't really know if this is it. I think it is. I spent hours making this, and so same thing applies there. Of course, in different programs, you can have like all the pattern pieces all in one file, and that really helps. But same thing applies. I think that's really good advice, is label intentionally to prevent sadness.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get into a couple tangibles. We've talked a lot about things that you could do, but I want to give everyone listening something they can actually take away and practice this week or this weekend or next week or whenever it is you're ready to sew. So Isaac, let's start with you. Where would you start, or where would you recommend people start for one of these make your own patterns at home?
So I think I would recommend starting with like the deconstruction method. And a great way to do this is just going to Goodwill or any secondhand store nearby and just finding something. It doesn't even necessarily have to be for you or something that will fit you. Just find something that kind of looks cool, that interests you, and take it home and start cutting it apart at the seams and just look at how the pattern pieces look at how they're put together. Then once you have all those pattern pieces cut out, you can put those on paper, trace them, and then just change it however you want and just start to experiment that way.
It's kind of fun because I feel like that way you get to make something that you wouldn't have made otherwise. Like, for instance, one of our coworkers here, Tim, really wants like a fishing hat, like a big sun hat. And like I tried to make one of those just off the cuff, and I got somewhere, but where I got was a place where I realized I wanted to do deconstruction mode. So that's exactly like why I think it's a great idea, but is kind of fun. And I'm looking for a couple different ways to do it. So I would love to buy something and tear it apart just to get that experience.
I'm just imagining like the Sorting Hat from Harry Potter.
Carter, where would you recommend people start?
I definitely think, like I said earlier, what Isaac's talking about is where I started. But I also don't want to discourage people from, something else we talked about in a previous episode is like, hey, if there's something you really want to make, and like the main reason why you're into DIY is that you have something that you want to make, like, I don't want to tell you otherwise. You can start there. There are tons of resources. We're a resource. The internet is obviously something that's pretty good, I think, in some ways. You're very connected to lots of information. Now more than ever and continually so. So if there's that one thing that you want to make, and that's what is risen you up, as they say, go for it. Like,
Yeah.
if you want to make that fishing hat and that's all you want to make, like, keep trying to hand draft it until it works out. But yeah, I don't want to tell people where to start too much.
Sure.
Only that any of the methods that we listed or have talked about are all viable options for you. It's just a matter of how much time and energy you have or are willing to spend to do it.
Sure.
So get out there and do a good job, guys. For sure, dog.
I guess I would recommend people start with the tracing method. And I do fully agree with what Carter said in terms of like, if that can't be done what you're thinking, then do whatever is going to inspire you to continue trying to do that. But if someone is truly down for whichever method we recommended, then I guess I would say go for the tracing method, because you can botch the tracing a bunch of different times and keep trying it and keep trying it and keep trying it. And there's a really low, like if you're tracing an axe, for example, you used one earlier, you're not going to hurt the axe. Like, you can keep tracing and throwing away pieces of paper to keep trying. It also takes a small, like you can do that on an 8x11 piece of paper, but also do it in a way where you could recreate that thing. I made way too many things early on that I planned it to only make it once. Like, I didn't take any notes or create any pattern pieces that I could then make more of that later on. And I wish I had, because now I have a few templates of like staples that I get asked about a lot. Like, I've made my wife a couple different fanny packs off like special fabrics that she wanted. And then her friends were like, that's really awesome. Now I want one. And I'm so glad I made that template, because I've made like 7 of those, and I would have had to kept recreating that one stupid panel. Yeah, that's it. That's what it feels like. I would have to keep making that same panel over and over again if I didn't make it. So make it in a way that you could do it again, because there's a good chance you will want it. But also that gives you the chance to keep adding on. Like, if you've done it once and you can say, all right, I want to add a zipper here, or I wish I did this component, or I want to make this with an embedded zipper. You can add on to it if you have the basis, because if you just keep making new things, it's hard to kind of develop those different skills. So that's what I would say I'd recommend. All right, let's start to wrap this thing up and get into references. There's a few really good resources out there that you have to know. We'll link these, but if you're getting into pattern making, go look at these people. They're very important. Let's start with you, Carter. Let's drop a couple.
Yeah, we won't bore you with a super long list. Make sure you check out the notes. We'll definitely include them. I don't want to say 500 names, but I think the first one and the most obvious one is YouTube. Like, you could we want to shout out these other people because they have more specific, they're more specifically connected to us and our fabrics and outdoor technical materials and stuff. So I think you'll get more insight from them. But at a basis, like, go on YouTube and type in what you want to do, whether that's learn a class. If you want to learn a class, you can learn on it. If you want to learn how to, or if you just want to watch someone hand draft a pattern and what that means and the basics, like, you can go on there and watch it. If you want to see how to make a bucket hat, I guarantee you there are 46, probably exactly 46 only videos on how to do that with included patterns that you could use and modify. So YouTube, that's my number one.
Couple names: Zipworks. We will link this, but YouTube Zipworks or zipworks.io, I think it is. I don't know the website. Amazing pattern generator. You can see what he does there. Learn MYOG as well has a pattern generator on Tim. He has a pattern generator on his site. They also make great patterns, so they would have wonderful resources to help you if you got interested in that. Stephen Jones from Bag Buff has a great video of how to make a bag on Clo 3D. So if you want to see kind of like a step-by-step guide of making a particular bag, then you can see the inner workings there. He's not going to teach you how to make your own bag, but he'll walk you through what he did there.
It's also really good if you don't know what like we've said that 6 times. Go watch his video and you'll see how he interacts with it and kind of how it works. And that could be the decision maker or the thing that helps you make the decision for, hey, should I try this out?
And then Isaac, you maybe have the best actual resources. What would you recommend?
Ouch, dude. Appreciate that.
Other than
Brock.
just YouTube in general.
Well,
basically what I'm saying is y'all can Google it.
You can figure it out.
another YouTube name though is the Jason of all trades. He's got a lot of really good videos. There's one specifically, I don't remember the name of it, but he did a series on like making like electronics equipment covers, and he goes into really good detail about like measuring and how to transfer that onto patterns and all that. And then the video that I was going to have Jameson link is it's called Duffel Bag Made from Paper, and he goes into a lot of good detail about prototyping before you actually make your product. So that's a great YouTube resource also. But as far as like real life resources, I guess, instead of virtual resources, there's a company called Canvas Worker, which is in California. So if you're on the West Coast and you want to drop some dough, it's a pretty good amount of dough. But you can go to Canvas Worker and you can take a really great class on how to make their conceal pack. I think the finished good side of that is brown buffalo.
Yeah, I think
it's brown buffalo. But yeah, you can go take a class with them. They'll show you how to make the pattern, how to sew it, all that stuff. If you're on the East Coast, in North Carolina, we have the Carolina Textile District, which is located in Morganton, I want to say, somewhere in the mountains.
That's a place here, so I'm going to go with
Western North Carolina. They have a lot of great resources as far as like, teaching you how to use a industrial machine, as well as like connecting people with whatever resources they need. Instructables has some really good walkthroughs. Some of the Instructables that I've seen are maybe less like textiles backgrounded and more just people like, oh, I did this thing and this is how I made it. So take all those, with a grain of salt, because they're makers just like you. So, and then the last one finally is talking to your grandma or your grandpa or, whoever did the sewing in their family. Like a lot of our family members did have to sew for a lot of their lives. Talk to your neighbors, your friends, like they have sewing experience. They've probably gone through a similar experience or a similar journey as you when it came to like learning how to use their sewing machine, learning how to make a pattern, all that stuff. So just talk to people.
I'm gonna throw out one more. Wanderous Bags on Instagram, that's the name, is making a bivvy, and they did like the full prototype with like a small like 1/10 version on paper and everything and built it. So if you want to watch that process, it's been pretty cool as well. So that's how to make your pattern at home.
Yeah.
Enough said.
Let us know if you have any questions or if you need some more resources. We're happy to try to help you along with your journey, but ultimately you got to get out there. You got to do some hand drafting, some tracing, some deconstruction, and some catting. And if you can do all that, then you can make anything that your mind wants you to. Was that creepy enough? It said in the outline, be creepy with this. Oh, wait, no. Okay, no, I didn't say that. I added that in there. My bad.
Carter, you know what they say, right?
They say a lot of mean stuff.
Yeah.
But
they also say if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. So you can definitely make a pattern.
All right. That's it, everybody. Sure. Have fun. Go make stuff, and we'll talk to you soon.